When 7-year-old Ethan Brooks swept his desperate eyes across the crowded Walmart parking lot, searching for help, his gaze locked onto a stranger loading groceries into his car. In a split second, he made a reckless decision to trust this man. James Parker's instincts, those of a soldier, returned from the battlefield with invisible wounds flared like a warning signal. He made a choice that changed everything, setting off a chain of explosive events. This is the story of two lives transformed, a testament that a soldier comes home not merely to rest, but to continue protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The first light of dawn slipped through the narrow gap of a small window as Ethan Brooks slowly opened his eyes. The 7-year-old's body curled tightly beneath a thin blanket. Outside, the roar of a truck engine shattered the stillness of the early morning. "Get up, you've got work to do." Carl Jensen's shouted voice rang out from the yard, making Ethan flinch. He sat up, his small hands trembling. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since he arrived here, a remote farm 200 miles from home. No one is coming to save me. The thought echoed in his mind like a cruel refrain. Aunt Linda's voice suddenly resurfaced in his memory, sweet yet chilling. "Your mother is gone. Your father doesn't want you anymore. I'm the only one who loves you." Ethan shook his head, trying to drive the words away, but they clung to him like darkness clings to light. He stepped up to the barred window and looked outside. 3 children, Lucas, Sophia, and Noah, were trudging toward the fields under the harsh summer sun. Their small shoulders sagged beneath heavy garbage bags. Ethan knew that today he would be going out there too. He closed his eyes, trying to remember his mother. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. His mother, Catherine, had still been there, her warm voice filling the house. Then, the accident happened. Screeching brakes, shattering glass, and afterward, only a hollow silence remained. His father, David, collapsed. The man who had once been strong was now little more than a withered shadow, lost day and night in alcohol. When Ethan called out, his father did not answer. When Ethan cried, his father did not see. Then Aunt Linda appeared, wearing a radiant smile and offering gentle promises. "I'll take care of you. Your father needs time to get through his grief." Ethan believed her. He believed every word she said. That morning, Aunt Linda put him in the car and said, "You're just going on a little vacation with me for 3 days. Your father needs some quiet." 3 days, just 3 days. But 3 days passed, and he didn't go home. A week, then 2. And with each passing day, Aunt Linda's eyes grew a little colder. Her sweet voice was replaced by sharp, cutting commands. "You have to work if you want to eat. Stop acting up. No one cares. Your father doesn't want to see you anymore." Once, Ethan sneaked into the shed and found an old phone. His hands trembled as he dialed his home number. But before the phone could ring a second time, Carl Jensen appeared. He yanked the phone from Ethan's hand, his eyes blazing with fury. "You looking for trouble, kid?" A slap struck Ethan's cheek, hard enough to send him sprawling onto the floor. From that moment on, Ethan learned a painful lesson. Obedience hurt less. Now, sitting in this dark room, Ethan felt his body go numb. He had cried too much. The tears were gone. All that remained was emptiness and a gnawing question. Why doesn't anyone see me? Maybe Aunt Linda was right. His father didn't want him anymore. No one remembered him. No one cared. But deep inside that small heart, a faint spark of hope still flickered. A quiet voice whispered, "If there's a chance, I have to try to ask for help." The door flew open. Aunt Linda stepped inside, her face stern. "Get dressed. I need to go shopping today. You're coming with me." Ethan's heart began to pound. In the past 2 weeks, he hadn't left the farm even once, and now Aunt Linda was taking him outside to a place with people, with light, with possibility. In the car, Ethan sat silently in the back seat, staring out the window. The street slowly came into view, crowded and bustling. Pedestrians, traffic, laughter and voices. All the things he thought he had lost forever. A spark of hope flared inside him, small, fragile, but enough for him to whisper to himself, "If I meet someone, I have to make them see me." The fluorescent lights inside the Walmart glared brightly, but to James Parker, they only made the world around him feel more distant and unfamiliar. He stood in front of the canned goods aisle, his empty gaze fixed on rows of neatly stacked cans of tomato soup. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for one. Then the sound came. A loud crash from the adjacent aisle. Someone had dropped a glass bottle. Shards scattered across the floor. In an instant, James was no longer in the supermarket. He was back on the battlefield. Explosions, screaming, a fellow soldier collapsing, that final look, pleading for help before the light faded away. "James, help me. I'm sorry. I didn't get there in time." He snapped back to reality, clutching the shopping cart. His heart was pounding. Cold sweat ran down his back. People nearby stared at him with curious, worried expressions. "I'm losing control. I'm not myself anymore." James Parker, 32 years old, former military police, 8 years of combat in distant lands, Afghanistan, Iraq. He had once been strong, decisive, the man his fellow soldiers trusted with their lives. But now, he was only a shadow of who he used to be. He had come home with invisible wounds, nightmares every night, a fear of crowds, an inability to concentrate. 6 months earlier, the local police department had dismissed him for being psychologically unfit for duty. Now he lived alone in a small apartment, surviving on veterans' benefits. No job, no family, no purpose. Who did I fight to protect? Just to come back here and live like a ghost? His parents, Michael and Susan Parker, called often. His mother's voice was always full of concern. "Are you eating properly? Have you seen a doctor yet?" But James always found a way to avoid the questions. He didn't want them to see how broken he was. Chris Taylor, a fellow soldier, had urged him many times, "You should see Dr. Helen Curtis. She specializes in helping people like us." But James refused. "I don't need anyone's pity." He bought enough groceries for the entire week so he wouldn't have to go out again anytime soon. He pushed the cart through the checkout lane and stepped into the parking lot under the harsh sunlight. Engines roared, horns blared. Everything felt suffocating. Go home, as soon as possible. He opened the trunk and began loading the grocery bags inside. The motions were mechanical, repetitive. But in the middle of it, an old instinct suddenly flared, the same instinct that had once saved his life and the lives of others on the battlefield. He looked up and scanned the parking lot. A woman was walking past, gripping a young boy by the hand. The woman was neatly dressed, too neatly dressed. But the boy wore wrinkled clothes, completely unsuited for the summer heat, and his eyes. The boy's eyes did not look like those of a child out shopping with his mother. They were frightened, searching, pleading for help. James froze, his brow furrowed. Something isn't right. A silent warning sounded in his mind, the thing he used to call survival instinct in combat. But immediately, another voice intruded. Am I imagining things? Is PTSD making me see danger everywhere? He wrestled with himself. Maybe it was just a mother and her child. Maybe the boy was simply tired after a long day. Maybe he was inventing a problem that didn't exist. But the boy's eyes. The way he walked stiff, as if being dragged along against his will. The way the woman held his hand, not with affection, but with control. James decided to keep watching. He didn't take his eyes off them. The woman parked about 5 meters away from him. She opened the trunk and began loading her bags. The boy stood silently beside her, his small shoulders hunched, his head lowered. Then he looked up. His eyes swept across the parking lot, searching, desperate. They passed over James, and then stopped. Their eyes met, and in that moment, James saw it clearly. The fear, the desperation, the silent cry for help. The boy stared straight at James. His lips trembled, forming words very slowly, very clearly. "She is not my mother." Time seemed to stop. James's heart hammered. Blood rushed to his head. He read every word the boy mouthed without sound. The boy repeated it, this time clearer, more desperate, his eyes filling with tears. "She's not my mother." And in that moment, James Parker, the soldier who had lost his way, the man who had felt useless, realized that perhaps fate had led him here for a reason. Perhaps today, he would not let a child disappear the way he had once failed to save his friend. This time, he would not look away. At that very moment, the woman turned around. She caught Ethan looking toward James. Her expression changed instantly from calm to wary, from wary to cold. She tightened her grip on the boy's shoulder, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Get in the car. Now." Ethan flinched, his small body shrinking in on itself. He obediently climbed into the back seat, head lowered, shoulders trembling. It was the obedience of a child, long accustomed to being controlled, not the natural obedience of a child with his mother. Linda glanced at James, forcing a stiff smile onto her face. Kids these days, they're always getting into mischief, aren't they? Her voice tried to sound friendly, but James caught the icy look behind her eyes. She got into the car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. James stood still, his thoughts clashing violently inside his head. If I'm wrong, I'm going to be in serious trouble. But if I'm right, a child will disappear forever. He remembered the oath he had taken when he joined the military, the oath he once believed he had betrayed when he failed to save his fellow soldier. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. He saw his friend's face again, the final pleading look before the light faded. If I couldn't save him, then at least I have to save this child. 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds to decide. Then James acted. He started his car and drove straight toward the only exit of the parking lot. He pulled across it, blocking the way completely. Engine off. Out of the car, standing upright in front of Linda's vehicle like a living barrier. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His voice was calm but firm. My name is James Parker, former military police. I'm in the Walmart parking lot on Route 66. I suspect a dangerous situation involving a child. I need immediate assistance. Car horns blared behind him. Linda leaned on her horn, shouting through the window. What are you doing? Get out of the way. Are you crazy? James did not move. He held up his phone, making sure she could clearly see that he was calling the police. Linda panicked. Her eyes widened. Her breathing quickened. A single thought flashed through her mind. This man is serious. I have to get out of here. Inside the car, Ethan sat in the back seat, looking through the glass. The soldier was still there, standing in front of the car, refusing to move. His heart pounded as if it might burst out of his chest. He believes me. He really believes me. Tears streamed down Ethan's cheeks, not tears of fear, but tears of hope. Still, he dared not cry aloud. Aunt Linda was sitting right in front, her hands clenched around the steering wheel, her body rigid with tension. Around them, bystanders began to notice. Margaret Stone, an elderly woman standing about 10 meters away, watched the scene with concern. She thought to herself, "What is going on here?" Kyle Anderson, a store security guard, hurried over, his voice sharp. "What are you doing? You're blocking traffic." James turned to him, his voice calm but resolute. "I believe there's an emergency situation. The police are on their way. Please keep people here." Kyle looked into James's eyes, the eyes of a man who had been through real combat, and immediately understood that this was no joke. Nearby, Jennifer Ross, a young woman, discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording. Her instincts told her this was something important. Linda realized she couldn't get past James. She backed up, turned the car, and searched for another way out. She drove toward the edge of the parking lot, where there was a curb and a strip of shrubs behind a low barrier. If necessary, she would break through it. James saw this and immediately spoke to the 911 dispatcher. "The suspect is attempting to flee. White SUV, California license plate." He read the plate number aloud while running back to his car. Linda drove up over the curb, the tires crushing the planter, smashing through the shrub barrier, and burst onto the street. Metal scraped and cracked loudly. Pedestrians jumped aside in panic. James leapt into his car, started the engine, and followed. He never took his eyes off the white SUV. "I'm not letting that boy disappear." The combat instinct, the one that had slowly gone dormant during months of emptiness, surged back with full force. Adrenaline flooded his body. His hands no longer trembled. His mind was no longer scattered. He knew exactly what he was doing. Inside Linda's car, Ethan clutched his small backpack tightly. He looked out the window and saw James's car following close behind. The fear was still there, the fear of what Aunt Linda might do if she escaped. But alongside the fear, something else began to grow. Hope. "I'm going to be saved. I believe that." He whispered a prayer to himself, his inner voice trembling but sincere. "Please save me. Please save me." The white SUV burst onto the main road like a panicked animal searching for an escape. Linda ran a red light, the tires screeching against the pavement. Other cars slammed on their brakes, horns blaring. Pedestrians jumped back onto the curb in terror, hands flying to their mouths. James stayed close behind, his eyes never leaving the white vehicle. He kept a safe distance, close enough not to lose sight of it, far enough not to cause danger. His phone was still connected to 911. His voice was calm but urgent. "The suspect vehicle is heading east on Route 66. High speed, extremely dangerous." From the distance came the wail of police sirens. 2 patrol cars appeared from opposite directions, Officer Mark Collins approaching from the north, Officer Lisa Turner from the south. Red and blue lights spun wildly, sirens tearing through the afternoon air. Linda glanced into the rearview mirror, her eyes wide with panic. The police were here. That soldier really had called them. I have to get away. I have to escape, no matter what. She jerked the wheel and turned into a residential neighborhood, narrow streets, blind corners everywhere. A slim hope that she could slip through the side roads and disappear. But James did not give up. He stayed with her, reporting continuously. The suspect vehicle has turned onto Maple Street, heading west. Inside the SUV, Ethan sat in the back seat, his small body thrown violently from side to side with every sharp turn. He gripped the seatbelt tightly, eyes fixed on the window. Police cars, flashing lights, sirens, and the soldier's car still behind them, never falling back. Inside his chest, hope flared like a fire after a long rain. They're coming to save me. They really are coming. He closed his eyes and thought of his father, the man who had lost his way after his mother died. The man Ethan still loved, despite everything. Dad, I'm coming home. Linda drove into a narrow alley, hoping the police cars wouldn't be able to follow. But James, with his military experience and instinct for reading terrain, anticipated her move. He took another route and positioned his car across the far end of the alley. As Linda burst out of the alley, she saw James's car blocking the road ahead. Behind her, the two police cars closed in. She was trapped. Linda slammed on the brakes. Her hands shook on the steering wheel, her breathing ragged, cold sweat streaming down her forehead. It's over. It's all over. A third police car arrived. Officer Sarah Mitchell, 38 years old, a woman with sharp eyes and a deeply compassionate heart. A mother of 2 young children, she had handled many cases involving kids. Sarah stepped out of her car, approached Linda's vehicle, and tapped lightly on the window. "Ma'am, please turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle." Linda opened the door and got out, forcing her voice to tremble like that of an innocent woman wrongly accused. "Officer, I don't understand what's happening. This is my nephew. That man was chasing us. I panicked and ran." Sarah looked into Linda's eyes, the eyes of a police officer who had seen far too many lies. Then she turned to James, who was stepping out of his car, his hands trembling slightly but his stance steady. "You're James Parker?" James nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I swear something isn't right." The boy in the car mouthed to me that she is not his mother. Sarah walked to the SUV and looked into the back seat. Ethan sat there, eyes red and swollen, shoulders shaking, small hands clutching an old backpack. She opened the door, knelt down to his eye level, and spoke gently. "What's your name?" Ethan looked into Sarah's eyes, eyes that felt warm and safe. He swallowed, his voice trembling. "My name is Ethan Brooks. She's taking me." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She had been on the job long enough to know when a child was telling the truth. She turned to Mark and Lisa, her voice firm. "Take her into custody," Linda screamed, her voice shifting from shaky to desperate. "My brother has problems. I was just taking care of my nephew." Sarah didn't listen. She turned back to Ethan, her voice softer. "Are you hurt? Did she do anything to you?" Ethan broke down in tears, not tears of fear, but tears of release, tears of longing, tears of a child who was finally being protected. He clung to Sarah, his small body shaking in the safety of her arms. Sarah guided Ethan into her patrol car and had him sit beside her. She draped her jacket over his shoulders and handed him a bottle of water. "You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you anymore." Linda was restrained by Mark and Lisa and placed in another police car. She kept shouting, kept trying to justify herself, but no one was listening anymore. James stood a few yards away, watching Ethan through the patrol car window. Relief flooded his body, followed by trembling, as if a storm had just passed through him. "I did the right thing. I wasn't wrong." Ethan turned and looked through the glass. His eyes met James's. His lips moved slowly, clearly. "Thank you, sir." James nodded. Tears welled in his eyes for the first time in many years. He was crying not from pain, but from the feeling that his life still had meaning. The small room inside the police station was warmer than the others, its walls painted a soft light blue, decorated with a few drawings of rainbows and beaches. It was a room set aside specifically for children, a place where they could feel safe while telling what they had been through. Ethan sat on a cushioned chair, clutching a small brown teddy bear that Officer Sarah Mitchell had just given him. His eyes still held fear, but a faint light of hope had begun to appear. Dr. Helen Curtis, 55 years old, with silver hair and a gentle smile, pulled up a chair and sat down at the boy's eye level. Her voice was soft, like a passing breeze. "Ethan, you're safe now. No one is going to hurt you anymore. Can you tell me what happened?" Ethan swallowed hard, his voice trembling and breaking, like a thread about to snap. "My mom," My mum passed away 3 months ago. Helen nodded encouragingly. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. My dad was very sad. He drank a lot. He stopped talking to me. Tears began to roll down Ethan's cheeks, tears of longing, the tears of a child who had lost too much. Aunt Linda said she would take care of me. She said my dad needed time. She took me away, but it wasn't a vacation. His voice dropped lower, as if he were afraid someone might hear. She took me to a farm, very far away. There was Mr. Frank. He was mean. There were other kids there. Lucas, Sophia, Noah. We had to work from sunrise until it got dark, picking up trash, gardening, sorting things. If we didn't work, Mr. Carl would get very angry. Helen asked gently. Did Aunt Linda say anything else to you? Ethan nodded. She said, if I told anyone, my dad would get into trouble, and I would never be allowed to go home. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest, but she held it back so as not to frighten the boy. Outside the room, Sarah pulled out her phone and called David Brooks. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello? A man's voice came through, exhausted and shaking. Mr. Brooks, this is Officer Sarah Mitchell with the Flagstaff Police Department. We have found your son. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. My son, Ethan, where is he? I thought my sister took him on a trip. I signed the papers for her. I was drunk at the time. I didn't know. David's voice broke completely, sobbing like a lost child. Sarah kept her tone steady but gentle. Mr. Brooks, you need to understand that Linda Brooks did not take your son on a vacation. She was holding him illegally. But Ethan is safe now. He's with us. On the other end of the line came the sound of David collapsing, of a man dropping to the floor, crying mixed with whispered prayers. Meanwhile, Captain Robert Hayes had deployed an investigative team. Detective Brian Walsh, 45 years old, with 20 years on the force, led the raid on Frank Morrison's farm. When they arrived, the scene made even the most seasoned officers choke with emotion. 4 children, Lucas, Sophia, Noah, and Emma, were sitting in a dark room. They were malnourished, wearing torn clothes, their arms and legs scraped and bruised. But the most heartbreaking thing was their eyes that had lost the innocence of childhood. Frank Morrison and Rita Morrison were restrained on the spot. Carl Jensen attempted to flee through the back door but was captured within 10 minutes. Each child was placed into a police vehicle, wrapped in warm blankets, given bottles of water and packages of crackers. One by one, they began to cry, not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming release of freedom. In the interrogation room, Linda Brooks sat across from Brian Walsh. She still tried to maintain her composure. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just helping my brother take care of his child. Brian opened a folder and placed it on the table. Bank records show that you withdrew $50,000 from Catherine Brooks's insurance account, money that was meant for Ethan. Linda said nothing, Brian continued. We also have text messages between you and Frank Morrison, messages discussing a transaction, about you paying him $20,000 to keep Ethan for 6 months. Linda's face collapsed. She lowered her head, tears falling but not tears of remorse. I needed the money. Catherine died and left the house and insurance money to Ethan. If David lost custody, I could control everything. Sarah, standing outside and watching through the one-way glass, slammed her fist down on the table. You sold your own nephew for money? A 7-year-old who just lost his mother? Linda cried silently, not out of regret, but out of fear of what was coming. After giving his statement, Ethan asked to see James. James was sitting in the hallway, his hands trembling as he held a cup of cold coffee. The effects of PTSD were still there, the adrenaline had faded, leaving his body exhausted. But when he saw Ethan, he stood up. The boy ran to him and wrapped his arms tightly around James, sobbing. You saw me. I tried to tell 6 people, but only you stopped. James knelt down and pulled the small boy into his arms. Tears streamed down his own face, tears of redemption. You were very brave, Ethan. I'm proud of you. In that moment, they both found what they needed. Ethan found a protector. James found a reason to go on. The news spread quickly. 5 children rescued. Their families were notified and were on their way. David Brooks was granted permission to leave his rehabilitation center to see his son, though he remained under the supervision of social services. Ethan was temporarily placed with his grandmother, Emma Brooks, a 65-year-old woman who had been crying non-stop for 2 weeks while searching for her grandson. James left the police station after night had fallen, but this time he no longer felt empty. This time he felt alive. 3 days have passed since Ethan was rescued. He is now living at his grandmother Emma's house, a small, cozy home with a flower garden out front and the comforting smell of freshly baked cookies drifting from the kitchen. Grandma Emma, 65 years old, with silver hair and wrinkled hands full of love, cares for her grandson with all her heart. She cooks Ethan's favorite meals, tells him stories before bedtime, and even sleeps in the same room so he can feel safe. But Ethan has changed. He is no longer the carefree child who once ran through the garden, who laughed out loud whenever his grandmother baked. His eyes are now constantly alert, as if danger could strike at any moment. On the third night, at 2 a.m, a scream pierced the house from Ethan's room. Grandma Emma jolted awake and rushed in. The boy was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide with terror, his body shaking, drenched in sweat. Don't, he cried, his hands flailing wildly as if trying to escape someone. Ethan, sweetheart, Grandma's here. Emma pulled him tightly into her arms, rocking him gently. You're safe now. I'm right here. Ethan burst into tears, clinging to her, his small body trembling uncontrollably. He had dreamed of Carl Jensen, the farm overseer, chasing him through the darkness. He dreamed of rage, of shouting voices. Grandma Emma soothed him until he calmed down, but Ethan was afraid to go back to sleep. He was afraid the nightmares would return. Daytime was no easier. Ethan didn't dare stay alone in a room. Whenever Grandma Emma went into the kitchen, he followed closely. Every time there was a loud noise, a door slamming, a car engine starting, he flinched and shrank back. Once, a neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, a kind woman, stopped by with some homemade pastries. But when she greeted Ethan, he stepped back behind his grandmother, unable to meet her eyes. Grandma Emma gently explained, "He's still frightened. He needs time." That afternoon, Dr. Helen Curtis came to visit. She brought along a box of crayons and blank paper art therapy to help children express emotions without words. Helen sat beside Ethan, her voice calm and reassuring. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan. You were brave to ask for help." But Ethan shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "But I told 6 people. They didn't believe me. Was it because I didn't say it clearly enough?" Helen knelt down to his eye level. "This is not your fault, Ethan. It's the fault of the adults who didn't stop to see. You did everything right." Still, Ethan blamed himself. Why didn't I run away? Why didn't I scream louder? Those questions gnawed at him day after day. 1 week after being rescued, Ethan was allowed to see his father. David Brooks entered the room under the supervision of Anna Hughes, a social worker. He looked thin, dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling. A month in rehabilitation had changed him, but the wounds in his heart were still deep. When he saw his son, David stopped. Ethan stood still too, looking at his father with eyes filled with both longing and anger. David dropped to his knees, tears pouring down his face. "I'm so sorry. I failed you. I'm the worst father." Ethan cried tears of longing, tears of a child who wanted to believe in his father but didn't know if he should. "Do you still love me?" Aunt Linda said. "You didn't want me anymore." David pulled him close, his voice breaking. "I love you more than anything. I lost my way when your mother died, but I will change. I promise you." But Ethan did not hug him back. He stood still, letting his father hold him, his body stiff and uncertain. After the visit, Ethan said to Helen, "I don't know if I can trust my dad again. He let Aunt Linda take me. He didn't protect me." Helen nodded. "Your father is trying to change, but you don't have to forgive him right now. You have every right to be angry. You have every right to need time." Not far away, James Parker was also struggling with his own invisible wounds. After returning home from rescuing Ethan, he felt empty, as if all his energy had been drained. Saving Ethan brought back memories of the battlefield, of those he couldn't save, of faces he could never forget. That night, he had a violent nightmare. Explosions echoed. A fellow soldier fell. James ran toward him but didn't make it in time. The light in his friend's eyes slowly faded. James woke at 4 a.m, sitting on the floor, shaking, his shirt soaked with sweat. The phone rang. It was Chris Taylor, his old comrade. "James, I heard what happened. You're a hero." James shook his head, even though Chris couldn't see him. "I'm not a hero. I just did what needed to be done. But you're not okay, are you?" Chris's voice turned serious. "You need to see a doctor, James." James said nothing. He knew Chris was right. But admitting it was too hard. That same night, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Moonlight slipped through the window, casting soft, wavering patterns. He thought to himself, "I was rescued, so why do I still feel afraid?" A few miles away, James sat in the darkness of his small apartment, looking out the window. The city lights still glowed, but inside him there was only darkness. He thought, "I saved that boy, but who is going to save me?" Two wounded souls, two hearts searching for healing. The road ahead was still long, but at least now, they were no longer alone. The courtroom was packed. The victims' families sat in the front rows, their eyes fixed on the defendants. Reporters recorded every detail. The public followed the proceedings with barely contained outrage. Linda Brooks sat at the defense table, her face pale, her wrists bound by cold metal handcuffs. Beside her, appearing in separate proceedings, were Frank Morrison, Rita Morrison, Carl Jensen, and Deputy Henry Shaw, the people who had created a 2-week nightmare for 5 children. Ethan was not allowed to attend because he was too young, but Grandma Emma promised she would show him the video afterward so he would know that justice had been served. The judge read the charges against Linda Brooks. The defendant is charged with unlawful detention, forced child labor, embezzlement, and falsification of documents. Witnesses took the stand one by one. Rachel Martin, a neighbor of the Brooks family. "I saw Ethan disappear. I asked Linda about it, and she said he was on vacation. I felt something wasn't right, but I wasn't sure." Tracy Nelson, a nurse who had worked at the local clinic. "I had seen Linda yell at Ethan very harshly, even before Catherine passed away. The way she looked at him, it wasn't the look of someone who loved a child." The jury deliberated for only 30 minutes. The verdict, guilty. The judge pronounced the sentence, 25 years. Linda broke down, crying and pleading. "I didn't mean to. I needed the money." But no one in the courtroom felt sympathy. Frank Morrison faced an even harsher sentence. Testimony from the 5 children, Lucas, Sophia, Noah, Emma, and Ethan, was presented by video to protect them from having to face their abusers in person. Ethan's voice in the video was soft but clear. "Mr. Frank said we had to work if we wanted to eat. We were scared, but we didn't know what to do." The jury did not need long. 30 years. Rita Morrison, 20 years. Carl Jensen, 15 years. Deputy Henry Shaw, the corrupt officer who had helped cover up the operation, was dismissed from the force and sentenced to 10 years, along with the scorn of his former colleagues. After the trial, the victims' families stood outside the courthouse. They felt relief, but not complete satisfaction. Lucas's mother spoke heavily. "They'll be locked up for many years, but my child still wakes up afraid every night. Justice doesn't erase the pain my child went through," Emma Brooks told reporters. "I want Linda to suffer the way my grandson suffered, but no sentence can truly do that." A week later, Dr. Helen Curtis showed Ethan a video of the sentencing, not the entire trial, just the moment when the judge read the verdicts. Ethan watched in silence. When the screen went dark, he spoke softly. "Aunt Linda will be there for many years now, but I'm still scared of her. I still dream that she comes to take me away." Helen placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's normal to be afraid, Ethan, but she can't hurt you anymore. She will never be able to reach you again." Ethan nodded, but the fear had not completely left his eyes. He asked Helen a question that had been weighing on his heart. "My dad, does he have to go there too?" Helen shook her head gently. "No, Ethan, your father didn't commit a crime. He's just struggling with grief and addiction. He's getting treatment to become healthy again. Can I live with my dad? Your father needs to show that he's healthy enough to take care of you first." "But he's trying very hard, Ethan. He loves you very much." At the rehabilitation center, David Brooks was fighting overwhelming cravings. Dr. Joseph Clark sat across from him, his voice firm. "How hard was today, David? I wanted to give up." David trembled, cold sweat breaking out. "My body hurts. The nightmares never stop. But you're still here. You're still fighting." David nodded, tears falling. "For my son. If I give up, I lose him forever." He wrote a letter to Ethan, words from the depths of his heart. "My beloved son, I know I hurt you deeply. I failed to protect you when you needed me most, but I am trying to become the father you deserve. I love you more than anything, Dad." When Ethan read the letter, He cried tears of longing. But the question remained in his heart. Can I trust my dad? Meanwhile, James Parker finally walked into Dr. Helen Curtis's counseling office. Helen looked at him with understanding. How do you feel after saving Ethan? James was silent for a moment, then spoke with a tight voice. I feel like I did something right, but I also feel the people I couldn't save on the battlefield, they're still there, in my head. You can't save everyone, James, but you saved Ethan. That matters. For the first time, James cried in front of someone outside his family. He cried for the friends he had lost. He cried for the years he had been lost himself. And he cried because, for the first time, he felt that healing might be possible. That night, Ethan lay beside Grandma Emma, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Grandma, will I ever be normal again? Emma held him close, her voice gentle. A new kind of normal, sweetheart. You won't be the same as before, but you'll be stronger. You'll love more deeply. And you'll help others, Ethan thought quietly. I don't really know what strong means anymore. But deep inside his heart, a small spark of hope began to glow. 3 months have passed since the trial. Autumn has arrived, golden leaves covering the schoolyard, and Ethan Brooks is preparing for a new beginning. On his first day back at school, he stands at the gate, gripping Grandma Emma's hand tightly. His hand trembles, his heart pounds. 3 months of therapy have helped him a great deal, but the fear is still there, the fear of being stared at, the fear of being asked questions he doesn't know how to answer. Grandma Emma kneels down and looks him in the eye. You can do this. I'll be right here to pick you up after school. Ethan nods, takes a deep breath, and steps through the gate. Melissa Cooper, a 39-year-old teacher with a warm smile, greets him at the classroom door. Hi, Ethan. I'm so glad to see you back. Ethan manages a small smile, but inside he is shaking. The other children stare at him curiously, whispering to one another. That's the boy who went missing. He was rescued. Ethan feels like he's on display, every eye on him, every whisper about him. He lowers his head and walks to his seat, wishing he could disappear. At recess, Ethan sits alone in a corner of the playground, watching the other children run and laugh. He wants to join them, but he doesn't know how. He feels different. A boy named Tommy, 8 years old, with reddish hair and a confident smile, walks over. Were you really missing? Ethan hesitates, then nods. Tommy sits down beside him. Weren't you scared? Ethan swallows. I'm still scared. Tommy nods, seriously. But you were brave. You asked for help. You didn't give up. For the first time, Ethan feels understood, not as a victim, not as someone weak, but as someone brave. That afternoon, Melissa asks Ethan to stay after class to talk. She sits down at his eye level. You don't have to pretend to be strong, Ethan. If you're scared, you can tell me. Ethan cries tears of relief. I'm scared. I'm scared someone will take me away again. Melissa places a hand on his shoulder. That won't happen. Your grandmother, your teachers, all of us, we're protecting you. You're safe now. Meanwhile, David Brooks leaves the rehabilitation center after 4 months of treatment. Dr. Joseph Clark stands beside him and shakes his hand. You've made a lot of progress, David, but the road ahead is still long. You need to keep attending your support groups. David nods firmly. I'll go to AA meetings every week. I won't let my son down again. Thomas Grant, a 29-year-old attorney, helps David obtain permission to see Ethan without supervision. After months of proving his commitment to change, David is finally allowed to visit at Grandma Emma's house. He arrives with a gift, a small blue bicycle with training wheels and a shiny silver bell. It's the bike Ethan had once wished for before his mother passed away. When Ethan sees the bike, his eyes light up, though he's still cautious. Dad, you bought this for me? David kneels down, his voice thick with emotion. I remembered how much you wanted it. I'm sorry I didn't get it for you sooner, Ethan asks, his voice trembling, the question that matters most. Dad, are you still drinking? David looks straight into his son's eyes. I haven't had a drink in 4 months. I promise you, I won't drink again. Ethan looks at his father. The man is thinner now, but there is light in his eyes again. Then Ethan throws his arms around him and cries, I missed you. David holds him close, tears falling onto Ethan's small shoulder. I missed you too. I love you, Ethan. Elsewhere, James Parker is finding his way back to himself. He continues seeing Dr. Helen every week, learning how to face his nightmares. He begins volunteering at a veterans center, helping others like himself, people struggling with PTSD. One day, Sarah Mitchell calls him. "James, I have a proposal for you. The police department needs an advisor on identifying victims, especially children. You have a rare gift. You see what others miss." James is quiet for a moment, then speaks with steady resolve. "I accept." For the first time in a long while, he feels a sense of purpose, not just a former soldier with PTSD, but someone who can make a difference. That afternoon, in Grandma Emma's yard, Ethan rides his new bicycle. The wheels roll along the stone path, the bell ringing brightly. David walks beside him, one hand on the seat, helping him keep his balance. "I'm going to let go now." David laughs. "I'm scared I'll fall." "I've got you, I promise." David lets go. Ethan pedals wobbling, swaying, then finds his balance. He rides farther still, then turns back, grinning from ear to ear. David watches, tears of joy streaming down his face. "Thank God. My son is coming back to me." Grandma Emma stands on the porch, watching the scene, tears in her eyes as well, but this time they are tears of happiness. Ethan rides his bike into the glow of the sunset, laughing for the first time in months, the clear, joyful laughter of a child, slowly reclaiming his childhood. 6 months have passed since the day Ethan was rescued. He is 8 years old now, taller, more confident, though there are still days when fear returns and nightmares resurface. Today is a special day. The court has granted permission for David to bring Ethan home to live with him, on the condition that Anna Hughes, the social worker, will conduct regular supervision. David stands at the front door, his hand trembling slightly as he turns the key. He has cleaned every corner of the house, wiped down every wall. Ethan's room has been redone, a new bed, a new bookshelf, and on the wall, a photograph of his mother, Catherine, smiling brightly. Ethan steps inside, with Grandma Emma accompanying him to help him adjust. He looks around and speaks softly. The house, it's still the same. David kneels to his son's eye level. "I want you to feel that this is your home. This is where you belong." The first days are not easy. Ethan remains guarded. Every morning when he wakes up, he quietly checks the refrigerator to see if there is any alcohol inside. Whenever David raises his voice even slightly, Ethan flinches and shrinks back. He doesn't dare stay home alone and follows his father closely wherever he goes. David is patient. He understands trust is not built overnight. "I know you're scared, Ethan. I'll prove to you that you can trust me." Small moments begin to build a bridge between father and son. Every morning, David wakes up early to make breakfast pine tree-shaped pancakes, just like Catherine used to make. Ethan eats quietly, watching his father with eyes that now hold the beginnings of trust. On weekends, the two of them walk through the park. David tells stories from his childhood, when his father was still alive, and how he taught David woodworking. Ethan listens, occasionally laughing when his father adds something funny. One day David asks, "Would you like to go visit your mom?" Ethan nods. They go to the cemetery in the afternoon, bringing a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, his mother's favorite flowers. David and Ethan kneel before the headstone and gently place the flowers. David says, "Mom is watching you from heaven, Ethan. She's proud of you. She knows how brave you've been." Ethan cries, tears of release, tears of a child learning how to forgive. "I miss Mom, but I know she wants me to live well." One weekend evening, the Brooks family invites James over for dinner. When there is a knock at the door, Ethan runs over, swings it open, and throws his arms around James. "You're here." James smiles and hugs the boy. "I've missed you, kiddo." Dinner is warm and full of laughter. David cooks beef stew and mashed potatoes. Grandma Emma makes apple pie. The family sits around the table, sharing stories and smiles. Emma looks at James, her voice filled with emotion. "You're the one who saved my grandson. Our family will always be grateful to you." James shakes his head gently. "Ethan saved me too. He helped me find meaning again, like a soldier coming home from war. He gave me a reason to keep going." Ethan looks at James, his eyes lighting up. "Are you still working with the police?" "I am. I help them identify children who need help, just like I saw you." At school, Melissa Cooper invites Ethan to speak to the class about child safety. At first, Ethan is afraid, but standing in front of his classmates, looking at familiar faces, he finds his courage. "Everyone, if you feel unsafe, speak up, ask for help." His voice trembles but remains clear. "I tried to tell 6 people before I met Uncle James, but I didn't give up, and in the end, someone saw me." There is always someone watching. There is always someone willing to help. The class applauds. Tommy, Ethan's best friend, stands up with a big grin. You're really brave. David also finds support. He joins a group for parents who have lost children or custody. At one meeting, he shares, I lost my wife, and then I almost lost my son. Now I'm rebuilding. Every day is hard, but my child is worth the effort. Others nod and share their own stories. David realizes he is not alone on this journey. James, too, is finding his path. Sarah Mitchell officially appoints him as a victim identification advisor. He trains young officers. Trust your instincts. Look into children's eyes. They tell you everything. Within 6 months, thanks to James's training, the police identify 2 additional child-related cases and rescue 3 more children from dangerous situations. Each time a child is saved, James feels like a soldier coming home, not from a distant battlefield, but from the war within himself. He is overcoming fear, healing invisible wounds. One night, Ethan lies in bed in his room. David sits beside him, reading Where the Wild Things Are, the book Catherine used to read to him every night. Ethan looks at his father and speaks softly. Dad, can I talk to you about Mum? David closes the book and looks at him gently. Of course. I miss Mum, but I also know she would want you and me to live well. She wouldn't want us to be sad forever. David pulls him into a tight embrace, tears falling, but this time they are tears of pride. Mom is proud of you, Ethan, and so am I. You're the bravest child I know. Ethan hugs his father, feeling safe for the first time in months. No fear, no doubt, only love. Outside the window, the moon shines softly, and in that small room, 2 hearts are slowly healing together, one step at a time. 1 year has passed since the day Ethan Brooks was rescued. He is 8 years old now, in 3rd grade, with a close group of friends he plays with every day. David has kept a steady job at the local woodworking shop 18 months without touching alcohol, a milestone he takes pride in every single day. James Parker works full-time as a consultant for the police department, helping train young officers to recognize children who need help. 3 lives that were once shattered are now being rebuilt, not the same as before, but stronger. Today, the police department is holding a special ceremony. The auditorium is packed: police officers, victims' families, members of the local community, and the press. Captain Robert Hayes stands on the stage, his voice ringing clearly. Today, we honor a man who proved that an ordinary person can change the life of a child. James Parker, a veteran who trusted his instincts and chose not to look away. James walks onto the stage in a simple suit, his hands trembling slightly. Captain Hayes presents him with a medal, a silver medal engraved with the words, "For courage and compassion." The room erupts in applause. Ethan sits in the front row, beside his father and Grandma Emma. He looks at Uncle James, his eyes shining with pride. Captain Hayes turns back to the microphone. And now, we would like to invite Ethan Brooks, the boy we all know, to say a few words. Ethan stands up, gripping his father's hand tightly. David smiles at him with encouragement. You can do this, Ethan. Ethan steps onto the stage and stands before the microphone. At first he is nervous, but when he looks into James's eyes, he finds his courage. I want to thank Uncle James. His voice is small but clear, carrying through the auditorium. You saw me when no one else did. You didn't turn away. I also want to say this to other kids. If you're in danger, don't be afraid to speak up. Ask for help. There is always someone watching. There is always someone willing to help. Just like a soldier coming home, they don't come back only to rest, but to protect those who need them. Tears stream down many faces in the audience. James steps forward and wraps Ethan in a tight embrace. They both cry tears of happiness, tears of healing. After the ceremony, James, Ethan, and David sit on a park bench nearby. The sunset bathes everything in golden light. Ethan looks at James. Are you still scared, Uncle James? James smiles. Yes, I am. I'm still scared. But I've learned that courage doesn't mean being fearless. Courage means doing the right thing, even when you're afraid. Ethan nods. Me too. I'm still scared, but I don't let fear stop me anymore. I want to help other kids so they know they're not alone. David places a hand on his son's shoulder. My son is very strong. I'm proud of you. That evening, Ethan sits at his desk and writes a letter to his mother, part of the therapy doctor. Helen recommended, Dear Mum, I've been through very hard things, but I was saved. I have Dad, Grandma, and Uncle James. I miss you every day, but I know you want me to live well. I'm trying to do that. You would be proud of me. I love you forever. Ethan. He folds the letter and places it in a memory box beside his mother's photograph. Then he smiles a peaceful smile. James goes home and stands by the window, looking out at the park. Children are playing under the warm glow of streetlights. Laughter drifts through the air. He feels at peace, a kind of peace he once thought he had lost forever after the war, like a soldier finally coming home not just in body, but in spirit. He remembers Dr. Helen's words, "You can't save everyone, but every person you do save gives meaning to your life." James opens his laptop and writes an email to Chris Taylor. "You were right. I needed help, and I accepted it. I'm living better now. Thank you for not giving up on me." The following year, Ethan turns 9 and continues speaking at schools about child safety. David becomes a volunteer at a rehabilitation center, helping others find their way back. James launches a victim identification training program for the community, not just for police officers, but also teachers, social workers, and ordinary citizens. Within 2 years, the program helps rescue 12 more children from dangerous situations. One morning at school, Ethan stands on stage during his latest talk. He looks out at the packed auditorium of students. "You might think you can't do anything when you're in danger, but I've learned this. Courage doesn't mean not being afraid. Courage means speaking up, even when you are afraid. And there is always someone who sees you. There is always someone like Uncle James, someone willing to stop and help. A soldier who comes home doesn't come back just to rest, but to keep protecting others. Believe that. Never give up." The entire auditorium rises in applause. That afternoon, James, David, and Ethan sit together on a long bench in the park, the place where everything began a year earlier. The sun sets, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. David says softly, "A year ago, I thought I had lost everything. But now I have my son. I have friends. I have a life." James nods. "So do I. A year ago, I didn't know why I should keep going. Ethan gave me that reason." Ethan looks at the two men, the father who found himself again, and the man who saved him. "And I've learned that sometimes saving someone else is also how we save ourselves." The three of them sit quietly, watching the sun sink below the horizon. No more words are needed. Their presence together is enough to know they have come through the darkness, and that light is waiting for them ahead. The story of Ethan and James is proof that sometimes the difference between tragedy and redemption lies in a single person who is willing to stop and truly see. Like a soldier returning home from the battlefield, James found his new mission not in distant lands, but within his own community, where a small boy was desperately crying out for help. And in saving Ethan, James himself was rescued from the darkness of his past. This story reminds us of a powerful lesson. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't be afraid to speak up. You might be mistaken, but if you're right, you could save a life. Teach children that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it is an act of courage. And most importantly, be the person who is willing to see when someone is reaching out for help. Every day, there are children silently calling for help. Every day, there are people like James searching for meaning. And sometimes, fate brings them together. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to continue following stories of courage, healing, and hope. Because sometimes, a single story can change how we see the world and perhaps save a life. Please share this video with the people you love. The more people know how to recognize the signs of danger, the more children can be kept safe. And if you or someone you know needs help, remember this: there is always someone watching, always someone willing to stop. Never give up.